Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really interesting. Recollections shared by one of you, actually.
Yeah, exactly. We're diving into, World War II in the Pacific, but through the eyes of James Taylor Schultz.
Right, based on this informal interview he gave. And our goal, really, is to trace his path, pull out those moments that, well, bring it to life.
It's that ground level view, isn't it? Not just big strategies and battles, but how it actually felt for a young guy going through it all, coming of age, right in the middle of it.
Okay, so let's dive in. December 7th, 1941. Schultz, he's what, 17?
Just 17, yeah.
Yeah.
Attending Morristown Prep in Jersey, working part-time at Day's restaurant there in Morristown.
And that's where he was when the news hit.
Apparently so, yeah. Near the end of his shift, he said, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the news about the Pearl Harbor attack, it just came over the radio.
Wow. And back then, getting news wasn't instant like today, right?
Oh, totally different world. You had radio, maybe what, 3 scheduled broadcasts a day if you were tuned in, newspapers, magazines, those Pathé newsreels at the cinema. That was pretty much your window to the world.
So when this huge news broke, it wasn't immediately clear what was happening or even where.
No, not at all. He actually remembers people in the diner asking each other, where is Pearl Harbor anyway?
Seriously, they had to figure out it was in Hawaii, out in the Pacific.
Took a moment, yeah. Which really tells you something about the general American mindset before the attack, how distant the world's problems felt, maybe.
A real shock to the system then. Ignorance shattered.
Absolutely. A brutal wake-up call. It wasn't just an attack on a base. It really shifted the whole national feeling, dragged America right into a global conflict that had maybe felt, well, avoidable before.
And the next day, that feeling must have just intensified. He heard Roosevelt's infamy speech.
Yeah, back at school, Morristown Prep, they apparently gathered everyone around a radio to listen. He talks about this powerful wave of national anger, just immediate.
Like a real visceral desire for war, for retribution.
Exactly. He even, draws a direct line to the feeling right after the 9/11 attacks. That same kind of collective sort of outrage and determination.
But he couldn't just run off and join up immediately, could he? He was still only 17.
Right. His 18th birthday wasn't till February 6th. But that didn't stop him thinking about it, planning. His first idea was actually pretty ambitious.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
He wanted to be a fighter pilot. Naval aviation.
Any particular reason he mentioned?
Well, his thinking, apparently, was he preferred the idea of having his own plane rather than, being responsible for a whole bomber crew. Maybe that individual control thing.
Interesting thought process for a teenager. So what happened with the Navy plan?
Well, he went and took the entrance test and didn't pass.
Oh.
So, into the dream.
They actually encouraged him to try again later, but Schultz, well, he wasn't really the waiting type, it seems.
It seems like it. He apparently just walked right down the hall at the recruiting station, saw the sign for the Marine Corps, and basically thought, yeah, that sounds more like me.
The tough reputation appealed to him. Marines were known for that.
Totally. He felt he fit that image, young and confident. And there's this funny detail where the Marine recruiter apparently said something like, well, we need pilots too, son, but everyone, and I mean everyone, starts with boot camp.
No shortcuts in the Corps. So that was that. He signed the papers in January 42.
Yep, even before he technically graduated high school early in April.
But since he was still 17, his parents had to.
Exactly. His mother and father both had to sign the enlistment papers, give their permission. Can you imagine signing your kid up for the Marines right then?
Must have been tough. And then he had to wait a bit to actually go.
Yeah, graduated early, but didn't actually get the call to report to Parris Island for boot camp until July 21st, 1942.
Parris Island, July 42. What was that initial shock like for him, entering that world?
Oh, it sounds exactly like the classic, almost mythic boot camp arrival. He mentions getting hauled in on actual cattle trucks.
Seriously? Not buses, but cattle trucks.
That's what he said. And then immediately, being screamed at, called boots, having all your civilian clothes and personal stuff taken away, total stripping down of your identity.
And then getting the uniform. He remembered those details pretty clearly.
Oh, yeah. He listed them. The boondockers, those really sturdy leather field shoes.
The ones he later told his kids to wear for yard work.
He did. And the leggings, the dungarees, the green service uniform, and that very distinctive cunt cap, as they apparently called the overseas cap.
That nickname definitely stuck with him all those years.
It clearly did. And the discipline, wow. just relentless and super strict. He talks a lot about the group punishment system.
Right, the classic Marine thing. If one guy messes up, the entire platoon pays the price.
Exactly. Even for tiny infractions, like your rifle not being perfectly clean or your cap slightly askew, the whole group suddenly finds themselves doing push-ups or endless drills.
Builds teamwork and accountability, I guess. Or just misery.
Both, probably. But the stated goal was unit cohesion, making everyone responsible for each other. Constant close-order drills, marching for hours.
And they were training with old weapons.
World War I era, Springfield bolt-action rifles on the firing range, yeah. He mentioned he expected to be a really great shot because he'd grown up around firearms.
And he wasn't.
He qualified as a sharpshooter, which is, pretty good, respectable, but not the expert badge he thought he'd easily get. A bit humbling, maybe.
How did he feel about the drill instructors looking back? Hated them at the time, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. He admits hating them intensely, like really viscerally hating them while he was going through it. But later, he understood they were just doing their jobs, shaping them.
And was it designed to weed people out? Or just break them down and build them up?
Didn't seem like many people got kicked out, according to him. The main aim wasn't really selection, more to physically and mentally whip you into shape for combat.
And by the end of those weeks at Paris Island,
he said his desire to actually get into the fight, to go overseas, had only gotten stronger. Boot camp solidified that.
So after boot camp, he's assigned as a basic rifleman, ready for deployment.
Yep. And he shares this kind of funny anecdote from maneuvers they did up near Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
Apparently, some recruit in their unit who thought he was really tough got into it with a Navy chief petty officer and just got absolutely decked, put right in his place. A little lesson in humility, probably.
Uh-huh. Always someone tougher. And they were training specifically for the Pacific Theater.
Definitely. They were practicing amphibious landings using LFCs, landing craft, flak, and those iconic Higgins boats. Everyone knew they were heading to fight Japan.
He was initially part of the 3rd Marine Division, wasn't he?
That's right. But then his group, or elements of it, got reorganized to help form the brand new 4th Marine Division.
And there was that whole East Coast versus West Coast Marine rivalry even back then.
Oh, yeah. The Paris Island graduates versus the guys trained out in San Diego, the Hollywood Marines, as the East Coasters sometimes called them. A bit of inter-service or intra-service banter.
Well, his own deployment got unexpectedly delayed, right? Something happened near Camp Lejeune?
Yeah, kind of a self-inflicted wound, you could say. He and some buddies went off base to a local beer hall.
Uh-oh. Sounds like trouble brewing.
Yep. Got into a fight, a brawl, really, with some Army post troops stationed nearby, and during what he hilariously described as organized grab-ass.
Sounds like a polite term for a chaotic bar fight.
Probably. Anyway, in the middle of it all, he fell or got pushed and broke his elbow. Bad timing.
Oh, no. So his unit...
shipped out for the Pacific without him. He got left behind.
So instead of going overseas, he ends up in the Naval Hospital. What was that experience like?
Surprisingly, he actually recalled it as being, well, relatively pleasant under the circumstances. He even specifically mentioned the, cute nurses.
Always a morale booster, I suppose. But the elbow itself didn't go up right.
No, it was a difficult recovery. It kept seeming to heal and then fracturing again when they tried to get motion back. Must have been incredibly frustrating and painful.
And he picked up another souvenir in the hospital.
Yeah, unfortunately. Contracted crabs. Pediculosis pubis, the proper term.
Yeah.
Apparently from shared blankets or bedding. Just adding insult to injury, really.
Must have been absolutely gutting watching his buddies leave without him.
Oh, for sure. He talks about feeling really down, completely left behind. At one point, the Navy doctors even suggested a medical discharge.
But he wouldn't take it.
Flat out refused. No way. He was absolutely determined to get back to duty and rejoin the fight somehow.
He even, pulled a fast one while on leave? Borrowed a uniform?
Yeah, apparently borrowed a friend's dress blue uniform that had corporal stripes sewn on stripes Schultz hadn't actually earned yet. His poor mother was apparently quite worried when she saw him parading around as a non-commissioned officer.
Trying to keep up appearances, maybe? Or just desperate to feel like he was still in the game?
Probably a bit of both,
Yeah.
Just clinging to that Marine identity.
So eventually the elbow healed properly.
Eventually, yes. He finally got cleared for duty again. He ended up getting shipped out to join the 2nd Marine Division, which was staging over on Maui at the time.
Though he was temporarily attached back to the 4th Division, right?
That's right, sort of loaned out. And his role changed, too. Because of the elbow, maybe, or just needs of the unit, he was assigned to a mortar section. Started with the smaller 61 mm mortars, then moved up to the heavier 81s.
And that's where he met Bob Ray.
Yeah, Bob Ray became a really close friend, his mortar buddy. They served together for a long time after that.
Okay, so he's finally back with a combat unit, trained on a new weapon system, got a good buddy. Then comes the real test. Saipan.
Saipan landed June 15th, 1944. This was it, his first actual combat landing.
Yeah.
And he was very, very direct about the fear.
Didn't try to act tough about it.
Not in his recollection, no. Just pure, unadulterated fear. He remembered the pre-landing briefing, hearing about the formidable Japanese defenses, including something they called the Saipan Wall. Sounded ominous.
And there was that bizarre warning about not eating the local vegetables?
Huh. Yeah, because the local farmers apparently used human waste as fertilizer. Just another strange, unsettling detail to process on your way into hell.
The fighting itself sounds absolutely horrific, a relentless push inland.
Yeah, constantly pushing towards the island's northern tip, Marpy Point. The initial big objective was securing Eslido Airfield. And he describes this one scene just awful.
After an airstrike.
Yeah, P-38 Lightning came in on a strafing run against a large group of Japanese soldiers caught in the open. He said afterwards there were just hundreds of bodies scattered across the landscape. The scale of death. Hard to wrap your head around.
What does his account tell us about the psychological toll of seeing things like that?
It just underscores the sheer, unvarnished brutality of modern industrial warfare. Any romantic notions of combat would have vanished instantly. He also mentions hearing about the horrific situation of the comfort girls.
The Korean and other women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military. Another layer of horror.
Absolutely. And then there was just the constant grinding fear, especially at night. He emphasized how crucial it was to dig your foxhole deep every single night for any chance of protection from artillery and infiltrators.
And he described the Banzai attacks. Those desperate, often suicidal charges.
He did, recalled the screaming, the chaos, and they learned pretty quickly that the Japanese soldiers carrying traditional swords were almost certainly officers.
Making them high-value targets, even amidst the chaos. A chilling detail.
It really is. It speaks to the different military cultures clashing, too. And after the fighting moved on in an area, there was the grim business of, going through enemy dead, collecting intelligence, sometimes souvenirs.
He also touched on the controversy surrounding the Army's 27th Division on Saipan.
Yeah, briefly. He mentioned their performance was considered poor by Marine standards, and the Marine General Holland Hallen Mad Smith ended up relieving the Army Division's commander. Caused quite a stir between the services.
And Schultz's overall impression of the Japanese soldiers they face?
He describes them, based on what he saw and heard, as incredibly vicious. He cited things like stories of torture from the Bataan Death March, like cigarette burns and finding mutilated bodies of captured or killed Marines. Just reinforces how brutal the Pacific fighting was. Very little quarter given on either side.
The main town, Garapan, was basically destroyed.
Largely flattened, yeah. The whole Saipan campaign was incredibly bloody and lasted about 6 weeks for his unit, including some mopping up and garrison duty afterwards. Really grueling.
So after Saipan, the next island hop was Tinian.
Right, Tinian.
Yeah.
Just across a narrow channel from Saipan, they did a kind of backdoor landing there, using Higgins boats to hit less expected beaches.
A bit less intense than the main Saipan assault, maybe, but still dangerous?
Oh, absolutely. Still dangerous. He recounts very sadly how a new replacement in their section, a young guy named Tietz, was killed almost immediately after landing by fire from a Nambu machine gun.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Awful. A reminder of the constant risk. What was clearing Tinian like?
A lot of it involved methodically sweeping through the island, especially these vast fields of sugarcane, which were perfect hiding spots for snipers. Really nerve-wracking work.
And he mentioned that strict Marine Corps firing rule again.
Yeah, he emphasized it. You only fire if you have positively identified a hostile target. No indiscriminate shooting. Strict fire discipline was drilled into them.
How did they deal with Japanese soldiers who holed up in the island's caves? That was common, wasn't it?
Very common. Standard procedure was to first try and get them to surrender. They'd use interpreters or Marines who knew a few phrases. Schultz even remembered trying to recall some, like, Dedakinasai, Bukanashine, trying to say something like, "Come out, friend, don't be afraid, the fighting is over."
Did that approach work very often?
Sometimes, perhaps, but often not. If surrender attempts failed, the next step was usually grim. Using C2 plastic explosives to seal the cave entrances permanently.
Grim indeed. How long did the Tinian campaign last?
much shorter than Saipan, maybe about 10 days of intense fighting for his unit. He did recall the monsoon rains hitting while they were there, flooding their foxholes. Misery on top of danger.
And he witnessed a couple of particularly striking things on Tinian.
Yes, two contrasting events stayed with him. He saw a Japanese officer commit seppuku, the ritual suicide with a sword, rather than be captured. But he also saw a Japanese soldier actually surrender, waving a white flag, something less common earlier in the war.
A sign of changing realities, maybe. And then after Tinian, back to Saipan.
Yeah, after Tinian was secured, they returned to Saipan, which by then was becoming this huge American forward base and staging area, and he actually ran into some of his old buddies there from the 2nd Marine Division he'd trained with originally. Small world, even in the middle of the Pacific War.
So Saipan now a staging area. Did they get some downtime? Some R&R?
Supposedly, yeah. Relax and recreation. But his description of R&R sounds typically Marine.
Meaning?
Well, he said a major component often involved scrounging up sickbay alcohol, which was apparently like 190 proof, basically pure ethanol, and mixing it with powdered fruit juice in those big metal water cans they call Blitz cans.
Sounds absolutely lethal.
Yeah.
And probably horrible tasting.
Probably both. But amidst this potent version of relaxation, they still had to do some light training, keep sharp.
More mortar practice.
Yeah, he mentioned their officer, Lieutenant Remington, and how he and Bob Ray would often have little competitions, betting their scarce booze rations on who could drop the mortar rounds more accurately.
Do they get good at it?
Apparently, they became highly proficient, really dialed in their skills with the 81mm mortars, so much so that they were starting to feel pretty confident, and they began to assume, the next logical massive landing had to be the invasion of Japan itself.
That must have been a daunting thought, even for seasoned Marines.
You'd imagine so. But then, something completely out of the blue happened. Schultz gets summoned to report to a Lieutenant Colonel Richard Nottingham.
Okay, sounds serious. What did the colonel want?
Nottingham laid out 3 completely unexpected options for him. Option 1, go to flight school. They still needed pilots. Option 2, accept a field commission, become a 2nd lieutenant right then and there.
Wow, a battlefield commission. But that would
require transferring out of his current regiment, leaving his buddies like Bob Ray. Or, option 3, apply for the V-12 college training program.
The V-12 program, right.
Yeah.
That was the wartime initiative where qualified enlisted men could go to college, paid for by the Navy and Marines, stay in the reserves, and potentially become officers after graduation.
Exactly that program. And Schultz, his decision was instantaneous.
Which one did he pick?
The V-12 program. No hesitation whatsoever.
Why so quickly?
His primary thought, he said, was crystal clear. I want to get out of combat, and I want to go to college. After what he'd seen on Saipan and Tinian, the chance to pursue education and step away from the front lines was irresistible.
Can't blame him one bit. It felt like winning the lottery.
He described this huge, overwhelming sense of relief washing over him, just pure relief. Although he admitted, that little nagging fear that maybe there'd still be one more landing before the V-12 thing actually happened. That fear still kind of lingered in the back of his mind.
And ironically, the next major target wasn't the Japanese home islands. Not yet, anyway. It was Okinawa.
Yeah, Okinawa. A place Schultz apparently hadn't even really considered as the next step. His unit, now part of the Marine Corps Reserve, was assigned to the operation under the overall command of the Army's 10th Army Corps, which fell under General MacArthur for that campaign.
And the initial landing on Okinawa, April 1st, 1945. How did that go?
Surprisingly, it was initially unopposed right on their landing beaches. Very little resistance at first. Schultz just wryly remarked that the main complaint was, quote, they were ticked off because we got our feet wet.
Huh. A calm before the storm, though. The Japanese had changed tactics significantly.
Completely. Instead of trying to annihilate the landings on the beaches like at Tarawa or Saipan, they'd pulled the bulk of their forces back inland into these incredibly elaborate, deep, and heavily fortified defensive lines centered around places like Shiri Castle.
So the battle for Okinawa turned into an absolute meat grinder.
Oh, unbelievably bloody and protracted. It just dragged on and on, lasted about 12 weeks in total. And the weather was atrocious, too constant rain, turning everything into a sea of mud. Plus, they were back on the less-than-gourmet K&Z field rations.
And the Japanese defense was as fierce as ever.
Incredibly tenacious, dug in deep, fighting for every single cave, ridge, and pillbox. Just unbelievably stubborn resistance, even though they had very little air support left by that stage of the war.
What about the impact on the civilian population? Okinawa had a large number of native inhabitants.
Yeah, and they were tragically caught right in the crossfire. He remembered them being largely unfamiliar with modern warfare, just terrified farmers and villagers suffering terribly from the relentless artillery barrages from both sides, widespread shell shock, just an awful situation for them.
Did Schultz make any observations about the Japanese equipment or fortifications on Okinawa?
He did note that their individual weapons, like rifles and grenades, seemed generally inferior in quality compared to the American gear by that point. However, their defensive strategy, using interconnected compartmentalized pillboxes and caves, was incredibly effective and made rooting them out extremely costly and deadly for the attacking Americans.
So they're still locked in this brutal, seemingly endless fight on Okinawa, and then the world changes.
Exactly. While the battle still raged, news started to filter through about these two new, incredibly powerful bombs being dropped on Japanese cities.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atomic bombs.
That was it, the game changer. Suddenly, the prospect of invading mainland Japan seemed less certain.
Where was Schultz when the actual news of Japan's surrender finally came?
He was actually aboard an LCS, a landing craft support vessel, basically a small gunboat, part of a flotilla that was already steaming towards mainland Japan, presumably for the initial stages of the invasion.
Wow. Talk about being right on the cusp, and then the word came through.
Yep. Radio message. Japan has surrendered. The war is over. He clearly remembers the ship just executing this immediate, sharp 180-degree turn.
Must have been an absolutely unbelievable moment. The relief.
He described this huge, spontaneous, joyous celebration breaking out among everyone on board, just sheer, unadulterated relief after years of fighting and tension. They turned around and headed back towards Pearl Harbor.
And the trip back to Pearl on that now empty LCS was different.
It sounds like it was almost surreal. The pressure was off. He mentioned the ship was pretty empty, just the crew basically, and they apparently even found or made a basketball hoop and played games on the deck. A bizarre but wonderful moment of release and fun after everything they'd endured.
From Pearl Harbor, how did you get back to the mainland U.S.?
He got transferred onto a small aircraft carrier, a CVL, a light carrier, for the final journey back to the States.
Any memorable incidents on that final sea leg?
Mostly smooth sailing, it sounds like, though he did recount one minor but clearly memorable encounter with a particularly mean or grumpy Navy cook. Just a small human friction point, but funny that it stuck in his memory after all the life and death stuff.
And then finally, landfall in the USA, San Francisco, landing at Treasure Island.
That was a truly significant, almost symbolic moment for him. He vividly recalled the ship sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge, looking up at it and just yelling out loud, "I made it!"
You can just feel that emotion, can't you? The relief, the triumph, just surviving.
Absolutely, a profound moment. Once ashore, he met up with some family members there. They gave him some money, and his very first act as a civilian to be: head straight to the famous Top of the Mark Lounge for a celebratory drink.
A well-deserved drink. And then the journey home across the country.
Began the eastward trek. Took a train down to Los Angeles first, then boarded another train heading east back towards New Jersey. He mentioned meeting a UCLA student on the train.
What was the actual discharge process like when he got back? Formal, ceremonial.
Sounds like it was pretty anticlimactic, actually. Quite unceremonious, just bureaucratic processing out of the service. He did mention that sometime later he received these published books in the mail, official histories of the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions he'd served with, which felt like a sort of belated, more formal acknowledgement of his service.
So back on the East Coast, he was processed out finally at Hadnot Point, near Camp Lejeune in North Carolina.
That's right. And interestingly, even at that late stage, the Marine Corps wasn't quite ready to let him go. They actually offered him a chance at a permanent career.
Really?
How?
Offered him a spot at platoon leader school down in Quantico, Virginia. A direct path to becoming an officer and staying in the Corps long term.
But despite his experiences, and maybe respect for the Marines, he turned it down.
He did. He said he had immense respect for the Corps, always would, but his mind was firmly set on finally pursuing that college education he'd chosen with the V-12 program. That was the path forward for him now.
So, discharge it was? How much severance pay did he walk away with?
His grand total discharge pay was $65.
$65 after years of service and combat in the Pacific. Wow.
Yeah, puts things in perspective, doesn't it? And he witnessed something pretty stark right there during the discharge process, saw another Marine just fed up or making a statement actually take off his uniform and burn it right there.
A powerful, maybe angry symbol of leaving the war behind completely.
A very final act. And then Schultz headed back home to his hometown of Morristown, New Jersey. How was he received there? As you'd expect, really. He was definitely regarded as a returning hero by the local community. He needed work right away, so he fell back on something familiar, lifeguarding. Started at the Morristown public pool, then moved to a private club.
Right, a place called Vreeland's Private Swim Club. And it was there, while lifeguarding, that his life took another major turn. He met a young woman named Barbara Peterson.
His future wife. Did he say how they met or what the connection was?
He described their connection as pretty much immediate, a strong attraction right away. Things moved fast. They ended up getting married in less than a year.
Wow, whirlwind romance after the war.
Seems like it. He even made a self-deprecating joke about feeling like he was robbing the cradle because Barbara was quite a bit younger than her older sister, Joan, who apparently was pursuing a modeling career in New York City at the time.
So, early married life begins. Where did they live initially?
For a short time, they lived temporarily with his father. Then Schultz landed his first real post-war career job, initially with Dunn and Bradstreet, the business information company. Then he moved to Cone Export and Commission Company in New York.
Cone Mills, the big textile company.
That's the one. And that job started a series of moves. First, Cone transferred him to their Chicago office. He and Barbara moved out to Highland Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. Their first child, Woody, was born while they lived there.
And then another transfer followed.
Yes, Cone moved him again, this time back west, to their San Francisco office. Schultz apparently called the SF office the Choice Office, largely because of their biggest and most important client on the West Coast.
Which was Levi Strauss & Co.
Exactly. Cone Mills supplied denim and other fabrics to Levi's, so it was a crucial relationship. Schultz got to know the folks at Levi's quite well, developing friendships with key people there like McGaffney and Peter Haas, one of the family members running Levi's. Levi's even threw a welcoming party for him when he arrived in SF.
Did that close relationship ever lead to a job offer from Levi's itself?
It actually did. At some point, Levi Strauss offered him a position directly with their company. But, perhaps surprisingly, Schultz turned it down, a decision he apparently came to regret later in his career.
Interesting what if. So he stayed with Cone Mills for a while longer in SF.
For a time. But then his career path took another turn. He moved back east again, to New York, taking a job with Martex Towels, another well-known textile brand. He mentioned having a somewhat embarrassing business lunch with the big boss there, a Mr. Herman room.
Huh. Details lost to time, maybe? But the draw of California was still strong.
It seems so. Eventually, Martex offered him the chance to move back to San Francisco to run their operations there. He said financially it wasn't really a big step up, more of a lateral move, but geographically, it was exactly where he and Barbara wanted to be.
So they settled back into the Bay Area for good this time.
Looks like it. They lived in Oakland first, and then moved across the bay to Berkeley. They bought their first house there on Alvarado Road, and became very close friends with their neighbors, Marion and Buzz Gibb.
He shared a memory involving Buzz Gibb.
Yeah, he fondly recalled a particularly memorable road trip up to Portland, Oregon with Buzz. They went to a famous place called the Oyster Bar and absolutely raved about the fresh Yucina oysters they had there. Sounds like simple, good post-war times, building friendships.
And the Gibbs played a significant role in their next move, too.
They certainly did. Buzz and his wife Donna were incredibly supportive friends. They actually helped Schultz and Barbara financially with the down payment on their next house, the one they bought over in Lafayette in the East Bay Hills.
The place they settled for the longer term. And got involved in the local community there.
Yes. Joined things like the Sleepy Hollow Recreational Association, became part of the fabric of the town. Really sounds like they put down deep roots there, building that stable family life after all the upheaval of the war and early career moves.
And his final memory shared in this particular account.
It seems fitting, somehow. His final recollection in the interview was simply about being home, settled, and content in Lafayette. A sense of arrival, perhaps?
So when you step back and really look at James Taylor Schultz's whole story, as he told it, it's an incredible sweep of 20th century American experience, isn't it?
Absolutely remarkable. You go from being that, somewhat naive 17-year-old kid working in a diner when Pearl Harbor happens.
Through the absolute furnace of Marine boot camp, and then into the brutal reality of island combat on Saipan, Tinian, Okinawa.
Witnessing these massive pivotal moments of World War II firsthand, making unexpected life-altering choices, like opting for the V-12 program.
The intense bonds he formed under fire with guys like Bob Ray. Those friendships forged in shared danger.
And then navigating that complex transition back home, trying to build a career, raise a family, find stability in a world that had been irrevocably changed by the war, and knowing that he too had been irrevocably changed by it.
It really highlights those powerful recurring themes we see in so many veteran stories. That stark collision between youthful assumptions and the brutal face of war, the incredible camaraderie born of shared hardship, the surprising turns and choices that shape a life path after the conflict.
And it's so vital, I think, as you said right at the start, to remember that this is his story, James Taylor Schultz's specific, personal, human perspective. It really makes you pause and consider the countless millions of other individual narratives, the unique experiences wrapped up inside these monumental historical events.
It absolutely grounds the history, doesn't it? Pulls it away from just maps and statistics and makes it deeply human.
Definitely. And, it brings up that fundamental, perhaps unanswerable question, too. How does a person reconcile those kinds of intense, often traumatic, wartime experiences with the demands and routines of ordinary civilian life afterwards? Going from jungle warfare to selling textiles, joining the local rec association.
It's a profound transition, one that countless veterans have navigated, each in their own way. His story offers us a valuable, albeit partial, glimpse into that journey.
It certainly does, a testament to resilience, perhaps.
Well, we really want to extend our sincere thanks again to you, our listener, for sharing this source material, these recollections, with us, and for joining us on this deep dive into the life and memories of James Taylor Schultz.
It's been truly fascinating to follow his path. A powerful reminder of both the human cost and the enduring human spirit found within the grand sweep of history.
Absolutely. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how those echoes of Paris Island, Saipan, Okinawa resonated through the rest of his life, even during quiet moments in his Lafayette home years later. Something profound to reflect on.